The thin mountain air bit at Jennifer Miller's cheeks, a stark contrast to the humid warmth of her native New Orleans. At 28, she had traded the charming wrought-iron balconies and jazz-filled streets for the rugged, snow-dusted peaks of western Montana. She stood on the porch of a cabin that seemed precariously perched on the side of a mountain, a place so remote it felt like the edge of the world, staring out at a panorama of towering pines and a distant, shimmering lake. Her fingers, accustomed to delicate embroidery and turning the pages of old French novels, now trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from a potent cocktail of fear and a desperate, fragile hope. She was a mail-order bride, a label that felt both antiquated and painfully accurate, a modern woman driven by an ancient longing for stability and a future far removed from the spiraling debts and quiet desperation that had shadowed her in the city. Her life had been a series of small, polite disappointments, culminating in the painful realization that her dreams of opening a small, artisanal bakery imbued with the rich flavors and linguistic heritage of her Creole upbringing were crumbling under the weight of unforeseen expenses and a failing family business. Her new husband, or rather the man who was meant to be her husband, David Miller, was a mountain firefighter. He was a man carved from the very landscape he protected, broad-shouldered, with hands calloused from battling infernos and felling timber, and eyes the color of a winter sky, perpetually scanning the horizon. David, at 35, was a widower, a fact Jennifer knew from their brief, stilted email exchanges and the single, carefully posed photograph he'd sent. A solemn man standing before a majestic, smoke-tinged sunset. He had advertised for a wife, a woman willing to build a life in a place where the nearest grocery store was an hour's drive, and the concept of entertainment usually involved a fishing rod or a clear night sky. He sought companionship, a steady presence, and perhaps a mother for his two young children, Emily, 7, and Billy, 5. He made no pretense of grand romance, only an offer of a stable home and a quiet life. For Jennifer, it was an escape, a chance to start anew, even if it meant sacrificing the vibrant culture she loved for the quiet solitude of the mountains. Their first meeting at the small, dusty airport had been awkward, charged with unspoken expectations and the weight of their unconventional arrangement. David, looking even more imposing in person, had offered a curt nod and taken her single suitcase, his gaze unreadable. The drive to the cabin had been silent, punctuated only by the crunch of tires on gravel and the distant cry of an eagle. Jennifer, clutching a worn copy of Les Miserables, had felt a profound sense of isolation settling around her, thicker and colder than the mountain fog. This wasn't the fresh start she'd envisioned in her romantic daydreams. It was a leap into the unknown, a gamble she wasn't sure she was prepared to win. The real conflict began subtly, not with shouts or confrontations, but with the suffocating silence of misunderstanding. David was a man of few words, his emotions as guarded as the secrets held within the ancient forests he patrolled. He saw Jennifer as a city girl, delicate and out of place, an ornamental addition rather than a true partner in the harsh reality of mountain life. He didn't ask about her past, her dreams, or the reasons that drove her across half a continent to a stranger's doorstep. He simply assigned her tasks, preparing meals from the sparse pantry, tending to the children who viewed her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, and keeping the cabin clean. He treated her with a distant politeness that was more akin to a landlord than a husband, his unspoken message clear: perform your duties, and we will coexist. Jennifer, for her part, tried. She cooked the hearty, simple meals David preferred, despite longing for the complex flavors of Creole cuisine. She read to Emily and Billy from their tattered storybooks, suppressing the urge to teach them French lullabies. She kept the cabin spotless, her fastidious nature a small act of defiance against the encroaching sense of despair. But her efforts were met with a wall of quiet indifference. David would eat her meals, nod vaguely at her questions, and disappear into his work, leaving her alone with the vast, echoing silence of the mountains and the unspoken judgments of a man who saw only her superficiality, not the resilient spirit beneath. One frigid afternoon, a particularly harsh winter storm swept through the valley, trapping them indoors. The children, restless and bored, were particularly challenging. Billy whined constantly, pulling at Jennifer's skirt, while Emily, usually quiet, became sullen and withdrawn. David, returning from checking on their livestock, found Jennifer trying to pacify a screaming Billy while Emily stared out the window with tear-filled eyes. He watched for a moment, his jaw tight, then simply shook his head. "This ain't for you, is it, Jennifer?" he said, his voice flat, devoid of real malice, but laced with a weariness that cut deeper than any insult. "City folk don't last long up here." He walked away, leaving Jennifer to battle the children's meltdowns and the crushing weight of his unspoken judgment. The next day, the tension escalated. A critical piece of equipment for David's firefighting crew, a specialized radio, had malfunctioned during the storm, and the instruction manual, printed only in French and English, was baffling the local mechanic. The nearest technician who spoke French was 2 days away, and a major forest fire was threatening a remote section of the park. David, frustrated and desperate, stood in the kitchen, arguing loudly on the phone with his chief, his usual stoicism replaced by a rare flash of anger. "I'm telling you, Chief Thomas, we can't translate this damn thing. We're losing precious time," he bellowed into the phone, slamming his hand on the counter. Jennifer, quietly preparing stew for dinner, overheard the conversation. Her heart ached for him, for the burden he carried. She knew that radio could mean the difference between life and death for his crew, for the forest. She hesitated, her usual shyness warring with an innate desire to help. Then, gathering her courage, she walked over to David, her voice soft but clear. "Perhaps I can help, David," she offered tentatively. He turned, his eyes narrowed, clearly annoyed by her interruption. "Help? With what, Jennifer? You gonna bake us a croissant to put out the fire?" His tone was sharp, dismissive. Jennifer didn't flinch. She simply pointed to the manual. "I speak French, David, fluently. Perhaps I can translate the instructions for the radio." David stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and utter bewilderment, the phone still clutched to his ear, his conversation with the chief momentarily forgotten. The silence in the kitchen was suddenly deafening, broken only by the crackle of the phone line. The revelation of Jennifer's linguistic ability hung in the air, thick with disbelief. David, still holding the phone, stared at her as if she'd suddenly begun levitating. His brain, honed for fire protocols and survival instincts, struggled to process the disconnect between the quiet, unassuming woman he perceived and the confident declaration of fluency in a sophisticated European language. On the other end of the line, Fire Chief Thomas, a gruff veteran of the service, heard the silence and barked, "David, are you still there? Did you find a solution?" Shaking off his shock, David finally lifted the receiver to his mouth. "Chief, hang on. I think I've got something. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. Just hold the line with the mechanic." He ended the call, his eyes, usually so focused, now locked onto Jennifer's with a scrutiny he'd never allowed before. "French," he stated flatly, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. "You speak French." Jennifer simply nodded, a small, weary smile touching her lips. "It's my mother's tongue. I grew up speaking it, and I have a degree in international business with a focus on European markets. I also specialized in technical translations to help fund my, previous ventures." The last part she mumbled, still ashamed of the failed bakery dream, but the rest of the statement was delivered with a quiet authority that stripped away the mail-order bride label. Without waiting for a response, she took the thick radio manual from the counter, flipped to the technical specifications page, and began translating the complex instructions on repairing the critical frequency band for David. Her voice, once timid and hesitant around him, became authoritative, precise and professional. She didn't just translate words, she translated technical jargon, explaining the concepts of band gap impedance and spectral density with the clarity of a seasoned engineer. David, utterly humbled, simply watched. This was a side of Jennifer he had actively ignored, a depth he had refused to acknowledge, blinded by his own prejudices about what a city girl or a mail-order bride must be. He saw the competence, the sharpness of her mind, and the dedication in her focused brow. When she finished the 2 most critical paragraphs, she handed the manual back, a slight flush on her cheeks. "Tell the mechanic exactly that," she instructed. "It's a specific calibration issue, not a hardware failure." David called the chief back, repeating Jennifer's precise words. 10 minutes later, the chief called back. The radio was fixed, the crew was mobilized, and they were heading out just in time to contain the blaze that was threatening the protected cedar groves. "He's asking who your translator is, David," the chief chuckled over the phone. Says she sounds like she belongs in a corporate boardroom, not a firehouse kitchen. David glanced at Jennifer, who was now quietly putting away the dishes, her momentary spotlight having passed. She's family, Chief, he answered, a subtle shift occurring in his tone, a nascent sense of protectiveness and pride replacing his former dismissiveness. The professional turning point had been achieved, but the deeper emotional conflict remained. David was ashamed of his earlier harshness and his lack of respect for her. He tried to apologize later that evening as he stared into the crackling wood stove. Jennifer, I owe you an apology for what I said yesterday, for judging you. I didn't know you were so capable. His apology was delivered awkwardly, like a man trying on a suit that was several sizes too small, but it was sincere. Jennifer, however, was not easily swayed. Being capable doesn't make me immune to loneliness, David, she replied, her voice low, or to being seen as disposable. I came here for a fresh start, not to be your housekeeper or a convenient prop for your life. I am a person with skills and dreams, just like you. This raw honesty pierced the veil of their awkward arrangement, finally forcing him to see the person behind the label. The emotional deepening began as David started actively engaging with her. He sought her opinion not just on French technicalities, but on matters of the household, and even on the logistics of managing the fire station's annual budget, a task he loathed, but which Jennifer, with her business acumen, quickly streamlined. He was learning that her intelligence was a vital, life-saving resource, not just a parlor trick. She, in turn, began to see beyond his stoic, rugged exterior. She realized his distance wasn't coldness, but a deep-seated grief over the loss of his first wife, a trauma that made him fiercely protective of his emotions and his children. She witnessed his quiet courage, the dedication in his eyes as he prepared for a grueling 4-day patrol, knowing he was risking his life to protect their community. The children, Emily and Billy, were the most powerful emotional anchors. They still treated Jennifer with polite reserve, missing their mother fiercely, but the language barrier became a new, unexpected bridge. One evening, Emily, struggling with a complex math problem, became tearful and frustrated. Without thinking, Jennifer began explaining the concept in a mixture of simple English and soft rhythmic French, the cadence of the language comforting and novel. The children, initially confused, were soon captivated. She introduced them to the delightful musicality of the French language, transforming boring chores into playful language lessons, inventing songs about the wildflowers and the stars. She had finally found a way to share her rich cultural heritage, not just a technical skill, with them, breaking down the wall of silence and suspicion that had separated them. This change did not go unnoticed by the community. At the next volunteer meeting, held at the rustic town hall, Jennifer attended with David. Her previous encounters with the townsfolk had been brief and polite, marked by the whispering speculation that inevitably follows a mail-order bride. But this time things were different. Sheriff Mark Anderson, David's lifelong friend, approached her specifically. "Jennifer, I gotta thank you," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "That radio fix saved us a fortune in repairs and, more importantly, gave David's crew the edge they needed on the Eagle Peak fire. You're a sharp cookie." He then went on to mention her organizational skills, which had helped the annual fundraiser's logistics, a direct result of her quiet improvements to David's administrative duties. The emotional turning point reached its peak during a late-night storm when David was unexpectedly away fighting a remote brush fire. A power outage plunged the cabin into darkness, and a sudden violent wind ripped a section of the cabin roof. Jennifer, terrified but determined, took charge. She didn't panic or retreat to tears. Instead, she efficiently lit the kerosene lamps, calmed the frantic children with a comforting French folk tale, and, using skills she'd never mentioned, learned from her handy grandfather in New Orleans, helped secure a heavy tarp over the gaping hole in the roof, battling the wind and rain with fierce resolve. She worked tirelessly, her small frame radiating a surprising strength, until the immediate danger had passed. When David returned 48 hours later, exhausted and covered in soot, he found a repaired cabin, a warm meal, and 2 sleeping children curled up near Jennifer, who was reading quietly by lamplight. Seeing her, not as the delicate city girl, but as a capable survivor, a fierce protector and a brilliant mind, hit him with the force of a sudden flash flood. He realized he had not bought a wife. He had been gifted a partner, The shame of his initial prejudice was complete. He sat down opposite her, his expression raw with exhaustion and a newfound profound respect. "You didn't have to stay," he whispered, his voice rough. "Most folks would have taken the first bus back to the city." Jennifer met his gaze, her eyes, usually guarded, shining with an unmasked loyalty. "This is my home, David," she stated simply, "and your children are my responsibility. I will not abandon what is mine." At that moment, the awkward contract between the mail-order bride and the firefighter dissolved, replaced by a deep, mutual understanding and the fragile beginnings of genuine affection. The distance melted away, allowing both to finally glimpse the depth of the other's character. David reached across the table and covered her hand with his calloused one, a silent pledge of acceptance and emerging love. This journey of overcoming prejudice and finding true partnership is what makes these stories so powerful. If you've enjoyed seeing Jennifer break down the walls of expectation and assumption and watching David finally open his heart, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. We share real-life inspired stories of overcoming adversity and finding love in unexpected places every week. And here's a thought for you. What do you think was the single biggest prejudice David had to overcome about Jennifer, and how did her French-speaking ability shatter it? Share your creative analysis in the comments. The fragile peace and burgeoning affection between Jennifer and David were shattered by the arrival of a devastating crisis that threatened to consume not just their home, but the entire community they had come to cherish. The Eagle Peak fire, the very blaze Jennifer had helped contain with her translation, flared up again, fueled by unseasonal dry winds and the remote location. It became a catastrophic wildfire, the most severe the county had seen in 15 years. David and his entire crew were mobilized for days, fighting on the front lines, their communication now constantly reliant on the sophisticated radio system Jennifer had helped repair. During the worst of the blaze, when the fire was merely a few miles from the small mountain town, the regional emergency funds were suddenly frozen due to a bureaucratic error that escalated into a political power play. The crucial water tanker contracts, essential for protecting the town's perimeter, were instantly put on hold. The climax of the conflict centered on the town hall, which served as the makeshift command center. Sheriff Mark Anderson, Chief Thomas and the remaining townsfolk were frantic. The only immediate solution was to appeal to the Quebecois logging and resource company, Laurent and Fils, a massive international entity with a regional hub in Vancouver, which possessed the highly specialized, high-capacity water transport vehicles the local fire department desperately needed. However, the company's CEO, a notoriously formal and traditional man named Alexander Turner, in his late 60s, was only willing to negotiate through official French-speaking channels and required a guarantee of municipal funding, which was currently locked up. Jennifer, who had been tirelessly coordinating meals and supplies for the exhausted crews, overheard the despairing, fractured conversation attempting to reach the Laurent group. She saw the fear in Emily's eyes and the quiet desperation in David's voice during their brief, crackly satellite calls. Stepping forward, her eyes blazing with a fierce resolve born of her love for her new family and home, she took the phone. "I will speak to Monsieur Turner," she announced, the command in her voice startling everyone. "I understand the contracts and I understand the culture. I will not let them hold this town ransom." She proceeded to execute a masterful display of crisis diplomacy. When Monsieur Turner's stern chief of staff, a man named Scott Nelson, answered, Jennifer didn't just speak French. She spoke the formal, intricate language of international business and high-stakes negotiation. She invoked the Treaty of Mutual Aid between resource companies, subtly appealed to the Laurent Group's public image, and, most importantly, explained the logistical details of the necessary contract security in impeccable, highly technical French. She did all this while simultaneously reassuring Scott that the municipal funds would be released within 48 hours, detailing the exact procedural steps needed, a process she knew intimately from her university coursework. The emotional resolution and turning point came when Scott Nelson abruptly transferred the call to Alexander Turner himself. Turner, initially cold, was utterly disarmed by Jennifer's eloquence and deep cultural competence. He realized he wasn't speaking to a frantic minor official. He was speaking to a sharp professional. In a final, decisive moment, Jennifer didn't appeal to his business sense, but to his humanity and his national pride, referencing the Quebecois tradition of solidarity. Turner, moved by her passion and impressed by her undeniable competence, agreed to dispatch the water tankers immediately, trusting Jennifer's word as the guarantee. The trucks were on their way within the hour, arriving in time to turn the tide against the encroaching fire. When David finally returned 3 days later, exhausted but victorious, he walked into the fire station command center to find Jennifer, not at the stove, but surrounded by local officials, signing the final translated Laurent Group contract. The fire chief was shaking her hand, and Sheriff Mark Anderson was introducing her as the town's unofficial diplomatic attaché. David saw her in a completely new light, not just as the brilliant woman who saved his crew, but the fierce, loving woman who saved his home and his community. He pulled her into a tight embrace, uncaring who saw. "You didn't just translate, Jennifer," he whispered into her hair. "You negotiated a miracle. You saved us." The lesson learned was powerful. True value is not in superficial appearance or assumed roles, but in hidden talent, resilience, and the willingness to utilize one's gifts for the greater good. The mail-order bride, judged and underestimated, had revealed herself as the community's greatest asset. 6 months later, the mountain was healing, and so was their family. David and Jennifer, Site 1-3, were married in a small, beautiful ceremony overlooking the valley where the fire had once raged, their vows a testament to their hard-won respect and deep, abiding love. Jennifer was officially named the International Resource Coordinator for the local fire and rescue services, leveraging her skills to secure year-round international aid and contracts, receiving a salary that completely dwarfed her previous expectations. 2 years after that, their lives were fuller than ever. Emily and Billy, now fluent in playful French phrases, adored their mother. Jennifer, now in her 30s, and David, nearing 40, had built a stable, loving foundation. One cold evening, sitting by the wood stove with David's arms around her, Jennifer noticed the worn copy of Les Miserables on the shelf. "Remember when you thought I was just a city girl with fancy books?" she asked, smiling up at him. David kissed her forehead, his eyes full of tenderness. "I was an idiot, Jennifer. You're the strongest person I know. You didn't just come here for a new life. You brought a whole new world to our mountain." The story of Jennifer and David, the mail-order bride who spoke the language of diplomacy, and the mountain firefighter who saw beyond labels, became a local legend, a constant reminder that the greatest opportunities often arrive disguised as the greatest challenges. Thank you for watching this story of Jennifer and David. We hope this tale of resilience and unexpected love warmed your heart. We welcome you to join our community and never miss another story of destiny changed. Subscribe right now to our channel and become a part of our story-loving family. We love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments, which city are you watching our inspiring stories from? Did you like this video? And what lesson did you learn from Jennifer's journey to overcome prejudice? We're eager to read your reflections.